Welcome to HCD's Mindset. I'm Michelle Nigella.
And I'm Kathryn Ambrose.
We are on a mission to help you identify what consumer science innovations have a lot of untapped value or are too good to be true.
So join us for more curious conversations as we try to make sense of the complex but fascinating world of human behavior. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Mindset. We are so happy to have you here today. It is Kathryn and Michelle back again, and we are doing a journal club episode today, but we're really excited because we have one of the many authors that was doing this really cool research, Dan Cameron. Welcome to the show. How are you doing today?
Thanks for having me. I'm doing well. How are you doing?
Doing well. Michelle, you doing great?
I am doing really well, and I'm super excited for this because, we do this journal club thing where we talk about a journal article that comes out that's somehow relevant to consumer neuroscience. And I just happened to be listening to NPR, and I heard this story that you were being interviewed and you were talking about some research that you did. And I was like, oh my goodness, I have to contact Kathryn. We have to talk about this. Kathryn, of course, took the initiative and was like, how about we just reach out to him and see if he'd be willing to talk to us about what he did. So thank you so much for joining us.
Happy to do it.
So where in the world are you right now? Where are you based?
I live in London, Ontario, so it's about 2 hours west of Toronto, and I work at McMaster University, which is in Hamilton, which is closer to Toronto, kind of around the bay. So I'm not there every day because it's a bit of a commute, but that's where I am now.
What is your position at McMaster?
I'm a postdoctoral fellow. So I have done some teaching while I've been there, but at the moment it's all research, and that's primarily what I do. So I work with Laurel Trainer, who's my direct supervisor. She's a auditory scientist, cognitive neuroscientist, and a developmentalist. So she's an expert in music and how children learn and babies perceive things, and all manner of stuff related to that. And we've got a great whole team that I work with there.
I saw that the institute you have there is really quite sizable looking at music.
Yeah, and there have been a few recent hires in music-interested scientists, and we've got the McMaster Institute for Music in the Mind. So this kind of group of people there, and we've got this facility, the Live Lab, where we did this research that we'll talk about, which is an amazing facility. So the Live Lab, Live stands for the Large Interactive Virtual Environment. So it's a performance theater. You've got a stage, and it's a really nice environment to be in, a cozy theater. You can have about 100 people seated or a couple hundred people standing.
Wow.
We have concert series there. We have performers. We could have drama. You can have, public speakers of different kinds, and musicians, and dance performances, and all kinds of things. And it's a research laboratory. So you can measure EEG, brain waves, and you can measure electrophysiology, heart rate, and GSR, and all kinds of things. We can use motion capture throughout the theater, which is what we did for this study. So a series of kind of infrared cameras around, and then if people wear certain markers, then you can track their movements really precisely. And we also can do like this really fine-grained acoustic control. So there's a whole series of microphones kind of hanging throughout the theater, and then a dense array of speakers throughout. So you can record what's happening and then project it back. And so changing the reverb, you can make it sound like you're in a huge cathedral or in like a tiny, tiny dead space. So you can do interesting research there. And hearing aid companies have used that space for research. So there's a lot you can do there, and it can be challenging to work in this kind of thing with so many things going on, but there's a lot of cool opportunities.
It sounds awesome. And
That's
so
amazing.
just to take a step back, how did you even end up in this space? How did you end up
There's this
there?
thing we always like to ask, which is, what's your origin story?
Yeah.
So you're a postdoc at McMaster, but where were you before? Like, why did you choose this path, or how did you fall into this path?
Yeah, I think like a lot of scientists, you kind of just find your way there. It wasn't a direct path. I didn't grow up knowing I wanted to do, the cognitive neuroscience of music. I didn't know what that was. I'm a drummer. I was a drummer growing up.
I wondered. Yeah.
And then I did my bachelor's degree was in music performance. So I did a performance degree. It was like, rehearsals and practicing and hours in the practice room. And I took some other courses here and there, but it was a very music focused degree. And I had never, I didn't hear about psychology or neuroscience, so that wasn't in my, world at all. But in retrospect, if I think back to what I was really fascinated by, it was about, kind of the internal experience of rhythm, that even as a kid, I was really fascinated by, rhythms and what you can do as a drummer and how it feels and how that's part of what we enjoy about music. So, I've always been interested in that in some way, and that's really been the kind of guiding central thing throughout my research career. Eventually, after my undergrad degree, I picked up a pop science book on music in the brain and was just hooked. I thought, I can't believe this world exists. I want to get involved.
Out of curiosity, what was the book?
It was a book by Dan Levitin called "This Is Your Brain on Music." So it was
wow.
a
I have
huge
it over
bestseller.
here.
Yeah,
I literally have it. I know the book.
It was a really popular book. It was, I think 2006 or 2007 it came out. And it was, it's very readable. There's all kinds of anecdotes from pop musicians and stuff. And it really hooked me. So I ended up, taking courses to make up for my complete absence of science, training, and did my master's over in the UK. There was kind of a music cognition focused program that I found my way into. Did my PhD back in Canada in neuroscience, studying rhythm and beat perception. I did a shorter postdoc at Georgetown University in Washington, D.C., and then had been at McMaster since the fall of 2018. And so that's kind of one thing led to another. And you end up, I've been studying mostly rhythm, but musical movement as well, and different aspects of music cognition, music neuroscience. That's my story.
Very
That's
cool.
a great story. And I think a lot of people can relate to that. I know Oliver Sacks is what kind of led me into my direction into neuroscience. But there's so many great books out there that are kind of like that. Do you still play drums?
Oh, not as much as I'd like to. With the pandemic, we've got little kids here, and so we've just been busy. And so I kind of put the drums away, and we moved at some point. So I haven't, unpacked them. But I'm still musical. I play the guitar and piano a little bit. So I, play little songs on the guitar as long as my kids tolerate it, and then they just tell me to shut up and they want to hear it on the Google instead.
Yeah.
But I'll get the drums out again, and might have got musician friends around, so we're all busy, but if we find time. But it's been, I think like a drummer still in a lot of ways. If I'm listening to music, I still feel like the same, musically the same person out of practice. But
it's funny you bring that up, because that's something I've realized. I grew up playing piano, but I'm still a violinist and a violist. And so when I listen to certain songs, I can pick out the instruments much more easily than my partner, who's never played an instrument in his life.
Right.
And so I'll be like, do you hear that melody? And he goes, what are you even talking about?
Right.
It's crazy. And I think about how, your perception does affect your behavior. And I think that's a really great segue into what we're talking about today. So I'm going to just share it. The link is going to be in the show notes, but the title of the study that we're talking about today is the Undetectable Very Low Frequency Sound Increases Dancing at a Live Concert. So do you mind just giving us a general overview about what it's about and how this research really came about?
Sure. Yeah. So we're interested in music-driven movement. What makes us want to move along to music? And that's not necessarily only dance. Like in our society, we think of dance as kind of a formal thing. You're trained to do it, or you've had like too many drinks at the wedding and you just go up and dance or whatever. But it's, I think of dance as kind of along the continuum with just kind of general moving along with music. If you listen to music, you tend to want to bob your head. You tend to, be able to tap your toe. And that's kind of an amazing thing biologically, like that we can do that, right? Like music is, we think of as this auditory stream, a sequence of auditory events and relationships between the different sounds. It feels good. It's got aesthetic kind of value to us. Why should it make us want to move though? It's not like if you're listening to people speaking that it necessarily makes you want to bob along to the rhythm of their language. Or if you're reading a book, it doesn't make you want to move when you are enjoying it more. So what is this about music that does this? And we know some different, contributing factors, and there's ideas about like on the evolutionary scale, like why is this the case, which I'm not an expert in, but is interesting. And I've been interested in like what aspects of rhythms make us want to move, which rhythms kind of give us a sense of this regular beat that you need to kind of move along. And then what other rhythmic features? It turns out that like some rhythmic complexity, if the rhythm's not too predictable, that's actually best. That draws people into the music. You want a little bit of that kind of funkiness and unpredictability, not too much, but some. But another kind of ingredient in this whole thing is bass. And we knew that there was an association between bass and movement from a couple different sources. One, anecdotally, we hear from people, or not personally, but this is out there, especially in like EDM, electronic dance music world, people will talk about the immersive experience of bass, that they can feel it when they're at a performance, at a concert. It's a good feeling. It can feel it through their body. It's part of the immersive kind of aesthetic, losing yourself in the music. It makes you want to dance. It feels good, all these things. And like, so there's this kind of awareness that there's something about bass and wanting to move and it feeling good. And then we know from experiments that there's an association here. So for example, if you have people just tap along with a metronome is just like beep, 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 very regular sequence of sounds, and have people tap along with that, their tapping is more accurate. They line up their taps with the sounds a little bit better when those sounds are low frequency, bass frequencies, compared to high frequencies ones up there. And that's just interesting on its own. And it kind of aligns with this anecdotal stuff that we know, that there's an association between movement and dancing, and then the bass frequencies. And you also see this represented in the brain. So if people are doing that task, tapping along with a sequence of sounds, when those sounds are lower, then the brain responses associated with them are a little bit sharper, a little bit faster and more temporally precise. So there's something about bass that's good for motor timing, movement timing. So our motor system in the brain, the movement areas like premotor area and supplementary motor area, are involved in timing generally. And we don't have a full understanding of like why that is exactly, but it seems like there's a relationship there that, okay, that system is doing the timing. We want to move along to the kind of timing in music. And that bass, for some reason, seems to have a kind of preferential access from the auditory stream to our motor system in terms of the precise timing. So that's covering kind of anecdotal and experimental evidence, but it's associated, right? They're associations. We didn't have causal evidence. So we wanted to do that, a real world experiment. So people at a concert where we try to like change behavior with this manipulation using bass rather. So how do we do this? What we didn't want to do is just like, okay, have these musicians come up, play, and then like crank the bass suddenly and see if everyone dances more. If that's the case, then people would first say like, what's going on with this music? Why is it just suddenly changing in these weird ways I don't like? The musicians would say, stop messing with our music. It was a concert first and foremost. Like that was the original thing, that like this musical duo called Orphix, this electronic dance music. They're fantastic. They're really good. We were putting on a concert that they were doing. The audience members were coming to see them. They knew them. They liked that music. They wanted to dance. They were paying tickets to do it. When they got there, we said, hey, do you want to volunteer to be part of science? We didn't tell them what we were going to do. We were vague about it, as we usually are. All they had to do was fill out a couple questionnaires and wear a little headband, a motion capture headband. So it was just a normal kind of black headband, and it had a little marker on top, a little sphere. And the cameras around the theater would kind of track those markers over the course of the concert. Wow. Now, what people didn't know, and was key to our manipulation, is we had these very special speakers. And if people listening at home might have a stereo system with subwoofers, these speakers are like subwoofers, so like really, really low frequencies that most speakers can't even produce these sounds. And we only turned them up a tiny, tiny bit because we didn't want to be interfering with the music and making people notice like, whoa, something different happened here. We wanted this to be a subtle, real world effect. And so this is what we did. The concert was going on, we'd turn the speakers on for 2.5 minutes, and then we'd turn them off for 2.5 minutes. On for 2.5 minutes, off for 2.5 minutes, back and forth throughout the whole concert. Then, having used the motion capture system to track people's movements, we could just analyze afterwards, did people move more when they were off or when they were on? Turns out they moved about 12% more when these very low frequency speakers were on. So that kind of confirms our hypothesis. We were shocked at how reliable it was. So it was a very strong effect in that sense. Is 12% more in terms of when people are dancing, is that a meaningful amount? How much does that really mean?
Was that 12% a difference from their own baseline? So like a change?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, so it was all normalized. So on average, like, because some people are already dancing a ton.
Right.
I was wondering about that.
Bobbing their head a little bit. So it's an average within that person. How much were they moving relative to their own kind of average baseline when the extra speakers were on versus off?
And
So yeah, go ahead.
I was just curious when you said you wanted this to be a real life immersive experience. So does that mean that people were also there with other people that weren't participating in the study? And so in a situation like that, are you then working under the assumption that people that also weren't being hooked up to this wire and everything, that they were basically, you're assuming that they also were affected by the low bass, it's just they weren't being measured? And then
I would assume so. I mean, we didn't measure them, but it's the people who we were measuring, they didn't know when we were going to be turning these speakers on or off. They didn't know that we had these speakers. And we did a follow-up experiment to test whether to confirm this idea that they were undetectable, that the manipulation was undetectable. And we got a couple pieces of evidence that suggested that it was. First, on the questionnaires people did, they after the concert, we asked questions like, could you feel bodily sensations as part of this concert experience? And they said yes, very much we could. What part of the sound was this associated with? The high treble sound or the low bass sound? The bass sound. They knew this. Did it feel good? Did it make you want to dance? Yes. So it confirmed what we thought were all associated here. People have an awareness that this is out there. But a key question was, did these bodily sensations that felt good, that made you want to dance, were they stronger or weaker compared to other similar concerts that you've been to? And people rated it like exactly the same. It was right in the middle. So it wasn't more and it wasn't less. These speakers are not common.
The difference.
That suggests that they didn't pick up on like, whoa, there's something different at this concert. These really, really low, speakers or something just feels different. Even if they. So that was our first confirmation or suggestion that our hope, which is that this would be undetectable to people, was that it worked. We had, but that's not enough to go on. So we did a follow-up experiment that we used a kind of a two alternative forced choice task. So we would have very short excerpts, like 3.5 seconds of the concert audio with those low frequency speakers and the rest of the speakers exactly the same. It had all been recorded through the kind of mixer and things, so we could just play the sound back exactly as loud and exactly the same levels and everything as during the concert. We would play these short excerpts 4 times for a single trial. So we'd play it in one pair once and again, and then we'd play it another pair once and again. They're all the same, except for one of those items would have the very low frequency speakers on, and all the other ones would have it off, or the opposite, that it would be off and the other ones were on. And the only question was, we didn't tell any of the participants about what the manipulation was or what to listen for, just which pair had something different between the 2 items. And people were exactly at chance. They could not do this task accurately, including experimenters. There were two of the authors on the paper did this as well. They knew what to listen for. They didn't know the structure of the trials or anything, but they were trying it, honestly, and they were totally at chance as well. And like being in the theater, I didn't, fill out the data, but you couldn't tell.
You felt like
I feel like this brings up so many questions.
Yes.
Right? We were talking about this sort of in the virtual office that we have at HCD, and some other topics started coming up. One, is this something that DJs would want to use at some point? And it already is to some degree something that horror movie people use, right? So these sort of sub-threshold, very like low frequency sounds that bring in anxiety. So what are your thoughts about the use of this in the wild?
I'm not an expert on all the uses out there, but people have gotten in touch, and there's different ideas around this. There's some concerns, like maybe are these dangerous? And there's this,
there's some evidence that it can make you feel sick, right? If it's really low and very intense.
Yeah, and like people have gotten in touch, like, oh, there's a wind turbine near my house, and the low frequency sound, it's constant, it's it's terrible. It's causing me problems. I'm not an expert on wind turbines and the sounds there. My understanding of the research, and we cite a really useful paper in our paper, we cite it, that covers some of like, what do we know about low frequency noise? And the main takeaway I have from that is that, yes, it can be kind of dangerous. It can cause stress and even pain if it's sufficiently loud, but that's true for all sound.
Right.
There's not necessarily, it's not clear that there's anything unique or special about very low frequency sound in terms of its harms or risks or anything like this. Now, in terms of low frequency kind of in horror movies and things, that that might be related to what we think is going on. Like, how does this work, first of all,
mechanistically in the brain.
Yeah, I mean, so it's like, okay, you're changing something in the music, but like they can't even tell that it's there and it's changing their behavior. Like,
Yeah.
how would this work? Now, it's important to step back, and remind ourselves that there's lots that goes on that we don't have conscious awareness of that affects our behavior. We're not, having conscious decisions about all the,
Of course.
choices we're making and all the thoughts we have and all this experience. We're doing so much implicitly. So many
Right.
factors can influence you without your kind of awareness of it. And a couple things, a couple examples that I'm going to link back to later. So if if someone bumps into you or like touches the edge of your skin a little bit, and you don't know that they're there, sometimes we have this feeling of like, oh, you move before you even kind of perceive consciously that it's there, right?
Right.
You can have these very like
Body
fast
schema.
reactions.
Yeah.
Yeah, and like even like reflexes of some kind. And this isn't a true reflex, but we can react to things before we get the conscious kind of awareness of it. Another example is like our vestibular system, our sense of balance, these inner ear structures that detect our kind of head position. If you are getting a little bit off balance in some way, then your postural muscles kind of get the command from our brain to correct for that kind of very, very quickly. You don't have to stop and think like, oh, I'm falling over. Like your body just knows how to do it.
Right.
So it's not a consciously detectable, process that's going on. So I give those two examples, like tactile stimulation and vestibular stimulation specifically, because we think they might be involved here at very low frequencies. And we think that because there's evidence that they are sensitive to very low frequency sound. So in terms of the tactile system, if you're at a normal concert, not these special speakers, but if you stand right close to, loudspeakers, you can often feel it on your skin or like rattling in your chest. We have mechanoreceptors on our skin and in our body that detect those like physical vibrations, right? So that can pick up.
Well, I was going to bring that up. In the deaf community, they do have dance parties, and it does rely heavily on bass. So really loud bass music to be able to dance.
I was actually curious if there was an exclusion criteria that included people that had hearing problems or anything like that. Did you explore that to make sure?
We normally do have people, when they do like an entrance questionnaire, we get just basic demographic information. We include, if they have hearing problems, and then we exclude them. I don't remember if we excluded anyone at this concert on that basis or not offhand. But yeah, I've heard from people since this has come out from talking about the deaf community, that like, oh yeah, they'll even do things like put speakers under the floor,
on the floor,
to make it more like feelable, that you can feel it vibrating through your.
A friend of mine does sign language linguistics and attends a lot of deaf parties, and that is exactly what they do. Yeah.
So I'm super interested in this, and we've just started to do some things with deaf participants in the lab as well, and thinking about low frequencies and how to make an enjoyable aesthetic, artistic experience.
But sometimes studying a model such as that could give you some hints as to what is also going on.
Yeah, exactly. So if there's people who are, and there's different kinds of deafness where the impairment is arising from and for how long, but you can try to identify like, okay, what pathways are processing certain information if you get responses. So we have reason to think from other research that like, okay, low frequency sound can stimulate the tactile system, and then that can have consequences for things like ratings of the urge to move along to music. So one of the co-authors on this, Mike Ho, he's an expert in this field, does really interesting creative research. He did a study where he had like a subwoofer in a car, and it was behind the kind of seat that people would sit in. So when it was on, it would vibrate people's hair a little bit. And he had people listen to music and then just rate how much did it make them want to move. And this is kind of a common way to measure what we call groove, or the urge to move along to music.
I love that you guys formally define groove. I just want to
yeah. So it's funny because it's like common term, but then we're having like there's an academic workshop in January, the groove workshop. So it's one of these funny things.
Do you believe that there's something special about low frequency? Because if you do the inverse of that, do you think high frequency also has an effect on somebody's willingness or non-willingness to move, or irritation? Like I would imagine like high frequency.
You think of like 90s electronic music where they always had the sirens, right?
Oh, right. Yeah, no, it might have other effects. It might be kind of like, get your autonomic system up because it's like,
it's a jolt.
But we think that might be what's going on. And this is to come back to like your question about horror movies and its use as well. So we think that like the autonomic system might be responding, and that might be getting like, where's that information coming? How does that get to the autonomic system to make us say like, oh, something interesting is happening, get your heart rate going, get ready to move.
Right.
We think that like tactile and vestibular might be ways that that's happening, that they're picking up on this extra sensory stuff going on that's so low level that it's not getting to our conscious awareness. But that doesn't mean it's not getting through to other, the autonomic responses as well as our motor system. So that like, especially if you're already dancing, and it's not like when we say like, oh, this undetectable effect, we didn't see like if you turn on the speaker and suddenly someone stands up from their chair and can't help themselves but dance. No, they were already dancing, and they dance with a little more energy. So we think it's like those systems are turning up the gain a little bit on our movement vigor.
Because that's what people worry about to some degree, right? Like when it comes to neuroscience coming into their real world experiences and how you can manipulate different sensory cues, right? We know there's no buy button in the brain. We can't, change the color of a product and you're going to be compelled to purchase it. So we can't compel you to dance.
Right. And we didn't measure like how many people started dancing when they were not dancing already, when these came on or anything like that. And it's possible you could try to look at that. But overall, when in a context where people were already feeling good, already enjoying the concert, there with their friends, all these like it was a real world situation.
Yeah, very real. Yeah.
And also they might have been intending to dance because you're going to a concert, you're going to an EDM concert. Like there is almost that expectation as well as that. When
this is not a random sample of the population out there. This is like people who choose to go to an EDM concert who like these musicians here and generally want to dance. So that's absolutely part of like the context in which we measure this. So we don't know, for example, like, does this generalize to all types of music? To like, what if it was unfamiliar listeners who like, maybe they didn't hate the music, but they weren't sure about it. Would it have an effect on them?
Yeah.
Jury's out, we'd have to test that. Those are testable questions.
I think there's some interesting things there with emotion as well. When we talked about the horror movies, that's almost an easier thing when you talk about autonomic responses and fear. That seems to add up pretty easily. But when it comes to enjoyment, I feel like it's a harder thing to capture, right?
Yeah. Well, I think part of it, like dance and enjoyment go together really strongly. And we know this from experiments where you see like a really, really strong correlation between people's rating of like, how much does this make you want to move for if they're listening to music? And then how much do you like it? Those things are like super, super highly correlated. And it's just like intuitively, if you think, is there any music that would make you like want to get up and dance, but you also hate? Like it's just like, what would that look like? How, it's impossible to imagine.
Like at weddings or something, the electric slide or whatever it might be.
Maybe, but like even then, I guess if it's like so much social compulsion that you're
like, so much nicer than me. I immediately went to Christmas music. I was like, I'm like, I've heard it.
Mariah Carey compels you.
Yeah, but it's typically like if you heard some music that was like, oh yes, it's got a very dancey rhythm, but like I don't like it. You don't want to dance then. Like in terms of an internal urge, maybe people say, oh, you have to come dance, and then you choose to do it. But that's different than like having an urge to do so. So and like this is what we talk about when we talk about groove in this research field. It's the pleasurable urge to move along to music. And there's some evidence like that, people tried to find, like, can you find music that people want to that they like, but they don't want to dance to? Yes, of course. Any ballad or any like, super emotional song that it's not about the feeling of wanting to dance. Of course, we can find music that makes us feel good, that we like, and makes us want to dance. Can you find that other quadrant that like they want to dance, but they don't like it at all? And like they couldn't find this in terms of the sample of songs that they looked at. So, and that makes intuitive sense. So yes, it's an emotional experience. I think the context was not, it's so key to this. They were doing something that they enjoyed. They liked this music, they were feeling good. And then we did something that they ended up dancing a little bit more. And we have some evidence that that their ratings were that they liked the music a little more in those times. It was a little bit hard to test. What we did was we used like text message probes. We would text people during the concert and ask them to like just keep in your pocket on vibrate and respond. And the question was just how much were you enjoying the music in the last minute? So we could look at their responses when the very low frequency speakers had been on in the last minute or off in the last minute.
I'm curious, just with the idea of concert goers, were you controlling for any substances that they were taking or anything like that?
No, it's a common question. We didn't control for that, and we didn't ask about illegal drugs or anything. it was a concert, and we have a little bar,
Yeah.
that we like a temporary thing we set up. So some people had drinks before.
Yeah.
I wouldn't call it like just anecdotally my own impression. It wasn't like a wild party. No one was like, whoa, that person's really something going on. No one was like wasted drunk or anything like that. It was, it wasn't these are stereotypes, but it wasn't like a dance party of 20-year-olds or something like this. It was a bit of an older crowd, and like these are people who like this kind of like niche EDM style, and these artists, like, they're popular and they tour and they've won awards, but it's not like super commercial music necessarily.
So I guess I want to, because I can't believe we're already close to time, but I have one question that I want to make sure that I ask you, and it really goes to understanding how you can make the claim for saying it's causation, because we always hear, correlation doesn't equal causation.
We'll preface this by, we were on a webinar earlier today that was all about like mathematics and ethics of causation.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I'm just curious how you make the leap from saying that something was just a trend because you saw the low frequency, occurring, to actually having that effect.
Well, the explanation would be that we turned the speakers on. Like, we decided when they were on. We didn't just say, and this is another approach that would be interesting, is to like, okay, let's look at just what the musicians were doing, and when they were playing more bass, did people move more then? That would be confounded by like, well, what else are they doing differently musically?
Right.
Now, in theory, that might be a confound here, because like the sections in which the very low frequency speakers were on were musically different than when they were off. But we tried to best control for that as well as we could by doing this kind of random sampling, on and then off, and on and then off, so that there's always these
regardless of what's going on in the music.
Yeah. So we didn't, and the musicians didn't know when we were going to be turning them on. They knew we had these speakers, but they didn't have they didn't know our schedule for when we were going to have them on or off or anything. And afterward they reported that they didn't know. They had like,
I wonder if they were moving more too.
That's a good question. Yeah. And
that was my initial question, I was like, is everybody moving more? Like, what's moving and grooving?
So we think if we caused that because we did the manipulation, we changed something, and then behavior changed. Now, like, what you can make of that, because some people have said like, oh, how do you know it's truly undetectable? You didn't test that so fully in those people that were there.
Which is why you had your follow-up.
Yeah. So we do the best we can, and we feel pretty confident about it. But it's possible that some people, would say like, oh no, I hear there's more bass, I'm going to choose to dance more because I like bass. That would still be an effect. It just would be less maybe interesting in these ways that there's a kind of automatic.
I don't know. I still think that that's interesting. I guess a question I have is kind of like, so you talk about all these different possibilities of what is going on. What is it that you guys are planning on doing next? How much longer are you doing this postdoc, and what are your plans as well? I mean, which is a terrible question, but
anyone want to hire me? You guys could give me a job later on. No,
we would love to work with you.
I like being a postdoc. It's a shame it's not
I enjoyed being a postdoc too.
in the long term, but no, the main two directions we want to follow this up in are nailing down the mechanism. So I talk about this like, okay, there's auditory, there's tactile, there's vestibular, like which of those are sensitive to which low frequency bands, or maybe all of them, which are causing these, changes in behavior, or is it all of them? Trying to parse that out and separate those. And that'll be, have to be some different kinds of experiments, but that's one direction we'd really like to go.
Like fMRI or what?
You could try to do brain measures. You could try to measure other effects on those systems specifically and see, and like, it might not be with the concert audio that we did before, like, okay, you turn it up loud enough so that people, it's detectable at that point. But if you can find an effect on like, okay, some measure that is sensitive to vestibular system, and there's some EEG measures you can look at with this. We haven't nailed this down, but that's one interesting direction. The other side of it is the social side. So we know from other work that we do in the lab and other groups have done, that when we make music together, when we dance together, and it might be about the synchronizing, that we've synchronized our movements together, we feel socially bonded with the people that we're with. We feel more connected with them. We feel better about them. We feel more as a group. And this is related to what people think might be the evolutionarily adaptive reasons that we have music and dance.
There is some evidence about physiological response getting, in sync as well.
Yeah, exactly. So this like interpersonal synchrony that goes on and the social consequences for that is like super rich, interesting field. and we've got a part in that, and how that played out here we don't know. So we didn't measure like, how do you feel about the people around you after this, and we couldn't do that during the concert, or not very in as fun a way. It's just say like, okay, stop, how do you feel about that person now that the low speakers were on? How do you feel about them now after they were off? So it'll be a different set of experiments. But there's other interesting things, like, the dance floor is a social environment, right? Like you were with people, some of them maybe some of them you don't know. You can see people, maybe you're watching people, maybe you're moving from place to place. Are some people more kind of infectious as dancers, where like, oh, they really respond to the bass or other musical features, and then people respond to them around them, and you might see kind of this
a social norm trendsetter almost.
Yeah, you can imagine it socially, just intuitively, and you may be like, oh, that friend who's like such a great dancer, people just end up watching them. So like, we didn't measure that here, but there might be these kinds of network analyses you can do. Okay, and so we don't know, for example, are some people more sensitive to these very low frequencies, and do they kind of have a kind of cascading effect on others in terms
like
of
location within the dance floor, sort of?
Yeah, so you could look at who they're around and who's influencing who, and these kinds of things. So that would be that kind of world of social interactions, the social dynamics of the kind of group dancing, and the social cohesion piece that relates to that as well. That's a whole other kind of side of this. So
I could talk to you about this forever.
I know.
This is the more we talk about it, the more I'm like, wow, this is incredible. But I do want to make sure that we have time for our game. I did warn you about it off camera, that we have a game called React Attack, where I'm just going to be asking you 10 random words. They are going to be somewhat related to what we've talked about today, but you're just going to say the first thing that pops into your head. Sound good?
Okay, do my best.
All right. So word number 1, sound.
Music.
Concerts.
Fun.
Rhythm.
Drumming.
Speakers.
I thought first I thought you were talking about like someone giving a talk. Like
that's
good. Say it.
Speakers, I would say loud.
Dancing.
Party.
Music.
Feeling good.
Raves.
That's raves. EDM.
EDM.
Oh,
that's the next word.
Yeah. Raves.
Volume.
Loud.
And the last one, drumming.
Rhythm. I guess I said the opposite too.
And actually, we have one more question for you. Sure. Are you a dancer?
I like to dance. I'm someone who moves a lot with music. I can't help but bob my head if I'm listening to music. I like to dance. I'm not trained as a dancer, and I don't get to do it very often. But I don't. Do you have a favorite type of music? Favorite type of music to dance to? I don't know.
In general,
anything that I like all kinds of music. I like finding out about new styles. But Afrobeat music. So from like Fela Kuti in the 70s. Started this music. I find that music like just so in a dancing way kind of draws you in. I can't help but move along with those. They've got great interesting rhythms, complex African rhythms. Like the African music tends to have really rich rhythms involved, and there's these like repetitive driving bass lines that just like the whole thing sucks you in. So I would say that.
So thank you so much for joining us. My final question for you today is, if people wanted to contact you, as well as I want to make sure that we highlight all the other authors and amazing people that were involved in this research. I know you were the lead author, but there's a whole team behind you. Where could they find you? Where can they find out more about your work?
Yeah, so I mean, this paper got a bunch of press, so you could Google it, low bass and my name or something like that, and people will find some information about it. I'm on Twitter. We'll see how long Twitter survives. I don't know what's going on.
Are you hopping over to Mastodon?
I opened a Mastodon account. I haven't been active on there or looking.
There's a lot of neuroscientists made the jump.
Yeah, it looks like academia is kind of moving there, and then Post News, like this is another one that is out there. So I mean, on Twitter, I'm Dan_Cameron. So you can find me there. Yeah, and my colleagues, I don't have their handles at hand, but it is very much a team effort. Dobry Dotov, he's a real expert in human movement and measuring it. So he did all the motion capture analyses. Erica Flayton, a grad student in the lab, she was a critical part of that as well. Dan Bosniak is the technical director of the live lab, and he had this, he knows these musicians, and so he had that connection there, and he had a connection to the sound company that lent us these speakers. Mike Hove, I mentioned, is a real expert in bass and groove, this urge to move. And then our fearless leader, Laurel Trainer, who secures the funding to do all this expensive research, and really is a wonderful guiding force through the whole thing as well. So awesome. We have a great team.
Yeah, very cool. We've really enjoyed this. Thank you so much for jumping on.
I have too. Yeah, no problem. I've enjoyed it. Nice to meet you both.
Nice to meet you. All right. Until next time. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
For more information or updates, follow HCD Research on LinkedIn, Facebook, and Twitter @HCD Research Inc. and @HCD Neuroscience. Subscribe to our YouTube channel and be sure to rate, review, and follow us on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts. Thank you, and stay tuned for more curious conversations.